Welcome to the ICU podcast, where we explore the vestibular experience through conversations between patients and the health professionals who care for them.
During this podcast, we invite patients to share their stories and healthcare professionals to ask questions so they are equipped to better care for and truly see the invisible challenges faced by their patients. I'm Kimberly Warner.
And I'm Cynthia Ryan, and we are your hosts on this journey of discovery.
Welcome, everyone, to the ICU podcast. We are so happy to have you here today. This is going to be kind of we'll see where it goes, but I'm thinking it's going to be a fun, lighthearted conversation, but who knows? You never know what to expect. Today, we're going to be talking about art therapy and vestibular disorders. We've all messed around with art at some point in our lives, and with perfectionists at bay, it can be playful, relaxing, revitalizing. But how often do we pick up a paintbrush because it also can be medicine? Personally, for me, when I was in the absolute terrors of MDDS, I picked up needle sculpting with wool, and it became a lifeline for me. And I know I'm not alone when I say that art can really soothe frayed nerves, give us a sense of purpose, and also help the quieter subconscious self within have a voice. So in today's podcast, we're going to explore how art in all of its forms can be a useful and powerful tool for those of us living with vestibular disorders, and how you can bring more of this creative act into your life, even if you're a novice. So don't worry. Don't feel like, oh, I'm not creative. This is for everyone. We have two incredible guests with us. Nicole Cure, who we're all very familiar with, I'm sure, is Colombian American artist living and working in Miami, Florida. Her abstract paintings explore the relationship between sound and daily life, inspired by her sudden unilateral hearing loss in 2017 and the subsequent diagnosis of Meniere's disease. Since then, Nicole has shifted her creative approach and style to illustrate her experience with hearing loss through color and movement. She uses mixed media techniques, incorporating soft washes and mark making to create fluid, abstract, energetic, yet calming paintings. And they are very calming. They feel like baths to me when I look at them. Beyond her art practice, Nicole is passionate about helping others and raising awareness for causes near and dear to her heart. In the last 7 years, she has partnered with the Hearing Health Foundation and, of course, Vestibular Disorders Association, donating her time and art to support their fundraising initiatives. Welcome, Nicole. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to see you again and to talk to our other very important guest. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yay! Well, I want to introduce our other very important guest, Jade Chung, who is a professional art therapist, an integrative trauma coach, and an intuitive healer. Currently, Jade is based in Vancouver, British Columbia, where she works with women who are looking to heal and expand in powerful and creative ways, body, mind, and soul. She's trained in a diversity of modalities that release trauma, rewire the brain, and awaken the soul so that her clients can shift into a life of alignment, authenticity, and embodiment. She's registered with the Canadian Association of Art Therapists and has advanced certifications in integrative trauma work and energy medicine, which sounds like one of the most interesting jobs I can imagine. Jade, welcome. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to connect with the community here and to talk about art, and also if energy stuff comes into the mix, happy to chat about that too.
I love that you work with women too, specifically. Yes, men are great too, but I love that your practice focuses on women because, man, we've been left out for millennia. So
I just feel like there is so much power and so much potential in, obviously all humans, all individuals, but in women, so much of it is so untapped because we do feel in many ways like constrained by different things, societal things, systemic things. And so, I really dedicate my work to just like empowering women and their souls to have a voice, to have expression.
Well, you have a great audience here because a lot of, I mean, we have obviously male vestibular patients too, but do you have a
Mm.
percentage, Cynthia? How many women per to men
Um,
are there? Does that?
there's definitely more women in our community specifically, which could be for a number of reasons. And there are some vestibular disorders that there are statistics that women are more affected.
Mhm.
I want to put a call out there. Welcome to the men here also, because everyone can be creative. And art is an amazing way to tap into that. I mean, I have that. I am not a creative person by nature. I am a left-brained person. I am very, I'm about organization and making sure things are getting done efficiently. But I have used art as a way to break out of that, to release my mind from that overly ordered focus, and to try to open myself up to creativity. And I've also had some experience with using art in to deal with trauma, which I'll talk about later on. But let's go ahead and let's get started with you guys.
Yeah, Nicole, you actually are an artist and you were before you had your vestibular diagnosis. Let's just give some people a little bit of background on your brief, a little, I know it's a long journey, but a brief version of your vestibular journey and how your art practice specifically was affected by your
Yeah,
diagnosis.
of course. I'm happy to share. I was actually I was born an artist. My mom and dad come from a creative background too. Fashion designer, architect, painters around me. So that's fantastic. I'd say I had a beautiful childhood. Grew up amongst all the artsy things, blueprints, magazines, fashion magazines, color, textile. So I've been an artist no matter what. Like that's in my blood. It did change a lot once I experienced my sudden hearing loss. I consider myself more of a surrealist artist. I would paint a lot of very detailed paintings. I love Salvador Dali, very unique artist. I really love his work, the intricacy of the little details and the stories. So I used to, for a long time, paint intricate art with a lot of very small details. When I got diagnosed, when I had sudden hearing loss, I had to stop painting because I couldn't focus, I couldn't draw, I couldn't paint. I was dizzy all the time. I was bedridden. I just basically left my bed to eat something and go to the bathroom. That's it. Go back to bed. That was, it was even hard to shower. It was harder to even walk to the kitchen for a glass of water. So let alone trying to set up my studio and paint. So long story short, I started exploring abstract work in a way of replicating sound and sound waves, because every time I would go to the audiologist, I would see in the screen the sound waves as they were testing me, and the little patterns, and that kind of opened another world for me. And first I did it for myself. I first created an abstract piece and I posted it because I didn't have a way to show the world what was going on with me. So I remember I was on Instagram and I suddenly changed like what I was posting, and I just went like public with it. And I said, here's what I'm going through. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know how I'm feeling. And this is what I painted because of that. And I don't even know where this journey is going to take me. And I remember looking for hashtags of people with sudden hearing loss and vestibular disorders as I was learning. And then all these people started to like DM me and talked about the stories. And I'm like, oh my God, first, I'm not alone. Like, this is not like a crazy thing that's happening to me, because I thought I was going crazy. I had anxiety. And then it's like, there is a whole world out there. And I found Vita. And I started reading about the stories and the glossary, like to understand each term. So my art started shifting because I wanted to tell my story and I wanted to learn from other people. So I always say that I've been an artist, but it wasn't until my hearing loss that I discovered my true passion and my
Wow.
real journey in the arts. So it's
Wow.
definitely changed. Yeah.
Wow, that's such an amazing story, Nicole. I've heard it dozen times, but I love hearing it every time.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's changed me. It's changed me because I never knew what I really painted or created. I thought it was just more like an automatic thing. Like, yes, I've been an artist, I've painted all my life, I've drawn, but now it's like a journal, a way of communicating where I don't have any words. I just talk about the
Mm.
work and let the work kind of speak for itself. And so many people also like look at it and tell me other things that they see there. So it's interesting to have that conversation where it's not only about my story, but they see themselves reflected in those sound waves, and they find themselves like, oh, I feel like this white space that you have in your art is the white noise that we hear when we have tinnitus. Or, and that's
Mm.
the intention. I do a lot of white space around my work to encapsulate the lots of sound and ups and downs of high frequencies and low frequencies. So a lot of my work, you will see like a focal point where it's the sound, and then you see like white space around it, surrounding, like soothing that. And
Yeah.
because I use that to soothe my own tinnitus. So it's interesting, like as I learn how I've been shifting my perspective towards, creating and painting and illustrating through my work.
Wow. So, Jade, I wanted to ask you how you became an art therapist, but could you start with what is art therapy? How do you use art as therapy, and then do you have like a personal anecdote of why that how that moved you and why you went in that direction professionally?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many pieces to this, but art therapy, as a general definition, is really just psychotherapy with art at the heart of it. And so, what we really do in art therapy is, in addition, right, to the language that we all speak, verbally communicating through like linear language, like kind of Nicole touched on, there is so much of our experience, emotional experience, our mental experience or spiritual experience that cannot be put into words. There is just no way to like encapsulate the depth of it. And so art, through color, through form, through shape, through texture, through storytelling as well, is just another language that we can express ourselves through, and also that other people can understand us and communicate with us through. So it just essentially gives us another channel for therapy to work. Um, and it's so powerful. A story that I don't know, art has really also been like a big part of my life. Nicole, it's actually it's crazy to hear your story because my mom is a fashion designer and my dad is an architect.
Oh, wow.
So there's some synchronicity there. I don't even know.
That's like exactly my household.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
interesting. So cool.
Kismet.
yeah. So I very
Yes.
much grew up around art as well and creativity. But for me, I throughout my life always felt like I needed to fit into more of society's structures, and so I was actually a commercial art sales dealer before I became an art therapist. So I was always really interested in art, but I didn't feel like I could go into, I don't know, I didn't feel like I had the capacity to go into the humanness of it, if that makes sense. And so it was really during the beginning of COVID when my career, because of the economy, kind of just went into flames. And I had to really like look into myself and look at how I was responding to the world, what was going on inside of me. And so it was then that I kind of went back into a deep art practice. Before that, I think I'd kind of dropped out of it. It was something that was a big part of my childhood. And then, as you go into adulthood, a lot of those like inner child explorative activities that we used to love, we kind of throw them to the wayside. So I started really just deepening into art again, and also poetry. And it brought me back to life, quite simply.
Wow.
And through my work with clients now, I really also see how having that additional channel of expression and communication can open up so much for a person. And
Mhm.
so, yeah.
I love how
And
you say that about that, having another channel of communication, because I think whether or not you have an illness, I think sometimes certain people, I'll speak for myself, but I always felt like the verbal, like I'm not as verbal as I am visual and sensorial. And so sometimes, especially with overwhelming emotions, it's really hard for me to find the perfect way to express what I'm feeling. And so I love how you said that, Jade, about it being another way of communicating. And Nicole, you've been doing that as well. And like you talked about this white space around the tinnitus, and you're creating that your audience, but you're also creating it for yourself, the need for it. And the so actually, that leads me into thinking. So you told us a little bit about how your art has changed after your diagnosis. Did you have to adapt your techniques too? Because you've been dizzy, you hear things differently. So how did your techniques change?
Yes, 100%. I used to paint on an easel. Now I paint on the floor.
Mhm.
And I paint on a table. But through my whole first 2 3 years of my diagnosis and sudden hearing loss, I could not stand while feeling like I would blink and lose my balance. Like I still struggle with that. If I close my eyes, if I have to do yoga and close my eyes, I tend to fall through my right side, which is the problem side. So I started painting on the floor because I paint fluid abstract. It's more like the technique is a lot of water, a lot of flowy inks, acrylic inks on water and different mediums to spread it, kind of like a watercolor, but on large pieces on canvas or wood panels. And being on the floor grounds me, obviously, but also allows me to, I don't know, see the canvas in a different way, balance and take breaks, and it just calms me and balances me. Before it used to be more like a faster approach. Now I take my time I use a clay spatula to push the water, and that is really relaxing. Like it's really, I post a lot of videos of that, and honestly, that's like people love those videos. It's like, oh my god, I'm gonna fall asleep. I'm like, yeah, it does the same for me. Like I tend to stress a lot. I don't manage stress very well, and when I'm in the studio and I'm doing those repetitive movements, I forget about my tinnitus. I forget about the ringing and the constant buzzing. Like it's like I get lost in the water, in pushing the water, and
Mhm.
like Jade was saying, like the shapes, the textures, like I paint with my hands too. Of course, I use brushes and other things, but like I get really in there. I get in the water. I touch the canvas, and it's very sensorial. It makes me relax. It makes me feel grounded to not only the floor but the material. But it's, if you look at my art before, I still love surrealism, and I little by little I'm incorporating some marks into the abstract work that it's coming back. But I'm in love with abstract because it allows me to just send a different message every time, and to play more with the material rather than just standing with one brush in front of a canvas. So there's so much sensory, like it's funny because experience sudden sensory neural hearing loss. I feel like there's a lot of sensorial um, things that I go into my art now. And if I didn't have, probably I wouldn't have gone into abstract if this wouldn't have happened to me. So it's like a blessing in disguise that I discovered another passion, another genre, another type of art form.
Yeah.
So yeah, completely changed.
I can totally relate to you saying that it gets you out of your head. That's what it does for me. That's what I like I said, I'm not a very creative person, and I went into fluid art to get to try to get myself out of my head. And 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 I think that also, you were talking about using art, Jade, using art as a method of communication. I think it also is a way to communicate with our subconscious. what things that we are not consciously aware of if we open ourselves up to it. So my experience with art therapy was after a car accident. I was in a serious car accident, and I was seeing a psychotherapist, and she saw that I do art, that I do my own fluid art, and she says, "I want you to paint your." I was having a lot of pain from the whiplash. She said, "I want you to paint your pain." And I went into that, I went into it. It's all about color, so I went into it thinking, okay, what colors am I going to use, and what does my pain look like? I used a lot of red, and I hated what I came up with. Not because it was bad art. I mean, art is subjective, but I hated the feel of it because it was my pain. I was bringing my pain out on the canvas, and so I decided, you know what? I don't want this pain anymore. I want growth. I want to know what's going to come out, where I'm going to be when I come out of this experience, how I'll feel when I get better. So I painted over the pain painting on the same canvas, and it turned out completely different. And it's the painting I've gotten the most positive compliments about. So it was tapping into my subconscious about why am I holding on to this pain, and what can I do with it?
Wow.
So can you maybe explain to us a little bit what is happening in our brains, in our autonomic nervous system when we practice art, and why does it have the potential to be so therapeutic?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm just like sitting with your story. I'm also sitting with Nicole's experience with like how you make art. And it's always just so powerful and beautiful to witness and like hear how others have moved through their pain or their experience through such a process. I'm just sitting with that. Um, but your question, your question about the subconscious autonomic nervous system. So I think that what both of you have spoken to has been the process of art being a space, or like when we use art, when we have a tool in our hands, when we have that texture, when we have that color in front of us, when we have that anchor, it allows us to first ground and kind of come into a place where we can be focused and be in flow with something, right? As opposed to usually if we're kind of in our sympathetic nervous system, if we're going through our day-to-day life, we are, our brains are up here just kind of floating around. We're thinking and thinking and thinking. We are not fully grounded. We're not in our, what we call our parasympathetic nervous system. And so art being in process allows you to essentially activate your parasympathetic, especially if you are working more in like process art, which both of you have described, really tuning into the process of what you're doing as opposed to like, let's say, Nicole, you were mentioning how you used to do a lot of like realistic, hyper-realistic, surrealist art. That can often be like in your mind. It can be very interpretive. But when we can get into the mindful art making and that modality of it, um, there is a certain way that your brain will attach to the external sensory stimuli that will activate your parasympathetic nervous system to turn on. And that allows you to just come into softness, come into connection, and then also come into flow. And then flow is that state of being that many of us might chase. It's like that feeling of being completely connected to something, being completely connected to yourself. And that in itself also is really, it's a pure state in your nervous system that is where the repair work happens.
Yeah.
Like,
Wow. That's a great way of putting it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And actually, Nicole, I was wondering as you were speaking about your process, when you are creating art, when you are, making art on the floor and you're using water, how do you tune into what needs to be said?
I feel
That's a
like
great question.
I do a lot of automatism, so it's very intuitive. I come
Mm.
into the studio with an idea, usually working on a collection, but a lot of my interest with water is how it vibrates when when I add inks or pigments. Like obviously the water vibrates on the canvas, just like sound vibrates. And it's interesting. It's interesting to me to see how organic shapes start appearing and how that kind of comes to memories that I've had of shapes and forms, but it creates a new one. It's a little hard to
Mm.
explain, but it kind of I let myself not be so strict with if I had an idea in mind. I feel like the material, the moment will dictate what it is. And this happens and I feel like it changes as my mood changes and what I'm experiencing with symptoms or no symptoms because sometimes with art a piece is not working and I leave it alone for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. And then
Mhm.
I recently picked up a painting that had been hanging in my studio forever, and then one day I looked at the shapes differently. What I was looking at it is kind of like
Mm.
a puzzle, and everything came back to me, and I had this urge to create. And it's everything like what I was experiencing. I've been sick with bronchitis, how my brain is trying to cope with everything now. And I finished the painting 4 days ago, and I it's one of my most favorite paintings, and I used to hate it. So I feel
Oh,
like everything that it's just time. I think like art heals like time heals because you have to give
mm,
the same way you have to give yourself time to heal. With art is the same. I think like some things could be quick experiments and things that you can do to be in the moment, but then with like a larger piece I let myself take time and the piece take time. So I've learned, because I'm always usually in a rush. I come from a background in advertising where everything is rush. Used to work for
Mm.
very hectic companies, and now it's like I'm finally giving myself that time that I need. So it's just like very meditative. So to answer your question, Jay, I feel like it's very intuitive. Like I come in the
mm,
studio, I do have a sense of what I'm gonna be doing, but I allow myself that space to kind of let my feelings and my body or my mind, what's going on, dictate the movement of my shaping tool or my
yeah.
brush, and then shape that water or the color through what I'm
Yeah.
feeling at the moment. I don't sketch anything. Never. I never have a sketch in my. That's not the way I process art. It has to be
Yeah.
like in the moment what I'm giving myself, and I give my all to the process in that moment.
I'm the same
So
way,
yeah.
Nicole. It's like no strategizing. Strategizing does not allow for that free association. And like when I mentioned at the top of the show, when I first was dealing with this dizziness and so isolated and all the emotions on top of the physical symptoms, I gravitated towards wool. And I had never sculpted in my life, but the like this muffled, warm, tactile feeling of it was like the womb that I needed to have around me. And once I picked up a needle and I was obsessed with hairless cats, and it felt like, I don't have any hairless cats in my life, but for me it was like they were expressing that fragility because they're so vulnerable. It's just like this
Right.
wrinkly skin, and I felt vulnerable like that. And so it's like I needed to just hold these 8 hours a day nonstop for 2 years. All I did was poke needles into wool, and it became such a therapy for me. And I didn't know until hindsight the different sculptures that I was creating that they were expressing my different stages of the
Yeah.
vestibular journey. Like the first one was all curled up in a little ball, and the last one was like reaching out, and it was so cool to feel that in hindsight my subconscious
Mm.
was
It's
expressing
interesting.
herself.
Yeah. And you can see the change, right? From beginning to end, like what was back then. There was a lot of fear at the beginning. And like what you
Yeah.
said, feeling vulnerable, like feeling like you're lost. I feel like when you experience a new illness, you really don't know. And then you feel guilty. What did I do wrong?
Mhm.
Did I work too hard? Did I push myself? Like, which is always the same thing. You go to you like, it's my fault.
Mm.
Like, what did I do? And
Yeah.
then like, how can I fix this? How can I feel better? And then like it's a circle that, so I feel like if I didn't have art, or you didn't have art, or any of us had any type, and when I say art, it's like what you said, Cynthia. Not, it's not painting or knitting, or like, it could be cooking, it could be going on a long
Mhm.
walk and taking photos and documenting your walk. I document my walk. I see textures on the leaves on the floor, and I'm like, I'm gonna bring that back to my studio. And if you're not in the
Mhm.
studio, you can print that photo, and it could be, so it's not like, I know Jade will agree with me, like art therapy, everybody goes to painting, their brain goes to, oh, but I don't paint. No, it's so much more than that. It could be collaging, it could be something that has to do with clay, like just getting yourself, it's so many different activities to get your mind off of the pain, or that
Mhm.
recurrent thought, like OCD, like trying to focus on the problem. And I feel like art gets you out of that, and it gets you to feel also like useful. You're creating a new story, you're not staying in the old story. I'm
Yeah.
sick, I can't, I don't feel well. It's like a victim mentality, so it gets me out of it. It's like, no, this is, I get to create something beautiful out of this that happened to me. And that's how I see it. I
Mhm.
label it in a positive way.
Yeah. I
Does that
think
happen
another
to you
part
guys?
Another part for me is letting go of the outcome. When I do a painting, it never turns out like I think it's going to turn out, you know, and letting go of that and being okay with that. And I think that that translates into our our recovery, our life as well. The life, as you were describing, Nicole, your life now is not what you necessarily expected it to be,
Sure.
before your vestibular disorder. And, that's okay. Accepting where we are and being okay with that, I think, is part of the process.
Exactly.
Jade, could you maybe take us through what an art therapy session looks like? Often, and in particular, I just wanted to kind of put this out there. Often, vestibular patients experience a lot of anxiety
Mhm.
along with their symptoms of dizziness. And can you tell us how you'd work with a patient who comes to you with that kind of anxiety?
Yeah, so with anxiety is the state that we go into when we essentially feel unsafe in our bodies. We feel unsafe in some way. Our nervous system is dysregulated in some way, and so we try subconsciously to control our environment or control the future as a way to help us feel safe, and to feel okay in ourselves. And when it comes to anxiety, it really, in general, I would say, is about coming back to the present. It's about pulling yourself out of the future and then also you know, projecting fears and projecting past memories into the future. And it's about how can you come back into the present moment in your body. And so, um, working with, a patient, a client who um, comes with anxiety or comes with dizziness, vestibular disorder, I would say a big piece of that really is going to be in the somatic piece of it, which is to first come back into a sense of grounding in yourself. And then from that grounded state, how can we feel into your body, feel into what's there, feel into the color that's there, feel into the rhythm or the textures that might be basically, like Nicole, what your process kind of is, kind of calling that in, right? How can you notice what is in your internal state, what's there, your internal experience, and how can we regulate that and ground that even more? How can we find, different ways, different colors, different textures, different materials? I know, Kimberly, for you, that's wool. How can we find different ways to like anchor our bodies into the present?
So would you
Um,
have like different boxes full of different materials, or like, and they would just be grabbing them, or?
So in person, ideally, yes. But often, now a lot of things are online. I work online a lot. And so often it will look like I'll have a session or two where we check in and just kind of see what the client needs. And then I might ask, if it's an online client, I'll ask them to go pick up a small range of materials that they feel called to use and that, I also feel like could be helpful. Usually that is going to be more like tactile, sensorial things. So water is beautiful. Yeah, like wool, cloth, fabric. Also, to be honest, I really love working with nature. I I ask my clients to sometimes I get a lot of resistance with this, but I ask them to go out for a walk, go out for a hike and like pick up some stones, pick up some twigs, pick up some like if you have like a Ziploc bag, can you like grab some soil? And like in our next session, can we use those pieces as ways to ground into obviously your body, but also these materials that we often forget are right here around us, but actually can tie us really into that can really tie us into like what life is all about and like like the energy that is actually all around us. So yeah, I love working with nature.
Wow.
Yeah, that reminds me of what's called forest bathing. When you're out in nature, if you're taking a hike, it's really it. I mean, I do a lot of hiking, and it's easy to think of it as we're here to get to this place. We're it's kind of like a march almost. But when you bring yourself into the present and you notice what's around you, it totally changes the experience. And you connect with not only visually, but the shapes and textures of things. Like right now, big into mushrooms.
We have a lot of them here.
They're amazing.
Yeah, just for looking at in the forest. That's what I mean.
No, but mushrooms really are amazing. I watched this documentary a few months ago on Netflix that was about like mushrooms, about
fantastic fun guy.
Wild.
Yeah.
I was blown. So yeah.
So this is actually
the best artist, I think, right? Nature is the best artist.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
every color and every texture. As an artist, I think you just go back to what you've seen and what you were saying, Cynthia. I mean, I don't live in a state where I can hike. It's flat Florida, alligators. But when I've been to the mountains, I've been to Colorado, and then I just like all the trees are different, the different types of the trunks of the trees, like everything. And I just I spend like time taking 1,000 pictures to bring back to the studio, but I feel like with so much connection now, we're online, we're on the phone, we're documenting everything. Just I love my walks too, like you guys said, because it allows you to explore and to meditate, to be with yourself instead of just, I don't know, chained to a phone or to a computer, which happens a lot. So
and I like that you said earlier, Nicole, that it can be going for a walk can be a creative act. This is a form of art, as long as our senses are open and receiving and interacting. This is actually, speaking of the visual sense, podcast is on YouTube so that people can watch this. And if you have a painting, Nicole, that you can share, and I see one behind you, but maybe you have another one in mind, but do you have one in particular that you can share with us that expresses your vestibular struggles and maybe even the revelations that you had when that manifested itself during this painting process?
My first one, it's called The Eighth Month, because I lost my hearing in August 2017. And the painting I kept that painting. I didn't sell it. I have it in my living room, and it's like a big mark in the middle of the painting, kind of like, I call it the incident. That's where my ear went off, like, but it's still bright and colorful. And I never painted with black. Like now I'm coming back to black, not from a perspective of sadness or grim. It's like, but I realized that even through my darkest times, I was playing with a lot of color. My first collection is called The Colors of Sound, and it's always gonna be like dear to my heart because that's what came out of it, and I never gravitated towards somber colors. And I feel like it's interesting because that's where I was the most depressed and crying every day and feeling very lonely and isolated. And then as I actually made peace with myself, I started experimenting with the browns and the black, more like I got this, it's okay. It's like I can paint in a more, not somber but like more neutral palette, but it doesn't come from a sadness or just negative perspective. It comes from me getting over that and being able to play with all the colors. And but I would say like my special painting is the first one that I did, the one that I created right after, because it marked the beginning of a new journey, the beginning of rediscovering and reinventing myself and my art. And I love that painting. I feel like, and I love I have the Calm collection, which is like the collection I'm currently working on. It brought me back to now using pencil, charcoal, other materials. So that's how little by little I'm like incorporating smaller marks and things like that, like coming back to myself in the past, but with all the experience and all the things that I've learned. Just I think my art is growing and I'm morphing into something different, mixing both techniques. I'm very happy where I am. Like I feel like I'm in a discovery process right now. I'm open to
Yeah.
explore materials, to not put myself in a box, because a lot of artists put themselves in a box. I am an abstract artist. I am a realistic art. I feel like we play with so many tools in the studio and things evolve that I could never be like just one thing. Like I feel like I'm open to daring to explore and to fail and to start over and to paint over and create new things and discover new things. Yeah.
I love
I also feel like your art, your work has been very much like a healing journey for you, right? It's been a part of your therapeutic journey. And so of course that's going to like evolve, right? Because your work is so personal and you're like through your work you are asking yourself what you need and your work is giving that back to you. It will evolve with you. And so now, as you're at a different level in your healing, you're able to like open up those doors back into the past, back into memories, and then be able to, yeah, to like explore in a more empowered way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Without
Yeah, you
fear,
wouldn't
I feel.
want it to be stagnant
Yeah,
because if it's mirroring your own inner process and you're just like, no, I have to stick with this specific technique because this is who I am, then you're
Mhm.
in some way stunting your own internal evolution with the,
exactly. And it's
yeah.
so joyful to see how back then you're like, oh wow, I was back then. Like that was me back then. Like I felt like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I had a diary where I wrote down like when is this going to end? I feel like I can't see anybody. I had hyperacusis, like severe hyperacusis at the beginning. I was literally isolated from the world. I would sit inside of the closet to avoid external sound with a towel wrapped around my head. Like I could not call my mom. I could not be on a phone. I could not listen to the sound of anybody talking to me. So like the first year was horrible. Like I said, okay, my life changed. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to go out to an art exhibition or be in a public place with sound. And now as I am able to do all those things, I'm like, wow, how there is light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, the experience is not the same for everybody. And to be honest, when you're out in social media, you get positive feedback and negative feedback. Sadly, some people are starting their journey and they get a little upset because you're already cured, quote unquote, but you're not cured. Like I'm still dealing with symptoms, but every person learns to navigate or call it the new normal, right? But I feel for them because I've been there. So I always take it with kindness. I always feel like, I know you're mad. I know you're in a bad place. I know you feel like probably I'm lucky because I live in a city and maybe you're in a small town. You don't have the same access. That's totally valid. but I know there's light at the end of the tunnel, because we've all been there where we feel like, okay, this is it. Like, life is over. How am I gonna work like this or function like this? But it's rewarding to see how you could get, stuck and then unstuck, and life keeps going. And you'll find ways to, through either through medication or therapy, or but there's going to be ways of you evolving through the illness and through your life. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. If anybody is listening, I know I've been there, where I was like in jail in my house, and now I'm not. So yeah, time helps.
Yeah, everybody is at a different place in their recovery, and it's, Jade, let me ask you this: is there, for, even though everybody is at a different place in their recovery, is there a simple exercise that someone can try after this podcast if they want to experience the therapeutic benefits of art in their, in their own home? Just something simple, because I know that we've talked about using a lot of different materials, and without having to go to Michael's, which is, I find, really fun, but something that somebody can do to tap into that creativity to help them process what they're going through.
Okay, I have many thoughts. Let me break it down. I think, first of all, I do want to say that I feel like it needs to be said that I believe that everyone is creative. And, I feel like we touched on this already a little bit, but creativity really is simply just anything. It's the state that you can be in and produce when you are creating anything. So it's just about creating. So you can create really anything, and for that to be therapeutic, if you are mindfully attuned to it and you are just in the process with it. And like I think, Nicole, you mentioned, like, it can be cooking, it can be I don't know, it can be building a sandcastle, it can be writing up an Excel, if that, that's creation too. If that's therapeutic for you, then like that is going to be the thing that grounds you. But beyond, I guess not beyond that, but in addition to that, something I always an exercise that I actually always, I guess, start with is, I feel like, Cynthia, you also have been asked to do this before, but really it's just grounding, coming back to yourself, coming back by breathing usually, and just grounding your energy in, and then tuning into your body and asking what emotions are there, and really what, let's say, color. Is there a shape? Is there a color? Is there a texture that I feel like I am carrying in my emotion or carrying in my body that is just there, that needs to maybe surface and come out? And then if you can attune to that part of you, right? Just asking it, like, what does that part of you, what is that color, what is that texture, what is that maybe even object, or like it's like a thing inside of you, how does it want to be expressed? And you can literally have a pen, a piece of paper, and you can just start like doodling that shape. Or you can, if you have a box of crayons near you, or you have a kid and you have, like a box of crayons, you can just start playing with that color that came up, right? And just notice what comes up for you as you tune into what's there. I feel like that is always, sometimes that can sound a little abstract, but I feel like that's the simplest and most effective, like, art therapeutic practice I feel like that everyone should learn.
I think that's really effective too for vestibular patients in particular, because it's simple. And I think all of us that have gone through this or are going through this, we have overstimulated nervous systems. So we don't want to get overwhelmed with too many choices, too many materials, I like that idea of just one crayon, and one color and one texture. And it seems like manageable for a nervous system that's already going a little berserk. And I'm guessing too, just on a practical level, I can imagine some of our audience is listening to this and they're going, okay, but how are my symptoms going to change? If I do this for 30 minutes and I feel horrible at a 10, am I going to be at a 5 when I'm done? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that's individual for everyone. But Nicole, do you, physical symptoms specifically, do you notice a shift in your symptoms after a painting session?
Yes, but it could be both ways. It could be, I mean, it relaxes me, but also if that day I'm more focused on finishing the piece, it might be a little more stressful because I'm trying to get to the finished line.
Mm,
But for the most part, when I get into the studio, it's at the end of the day. I paint during the weekends and evenings. After I have like office hours and stuff, but I feel like when the night, I like the silence of the late evening hours. Like people are, like the noise of the city is not so much there. And I feel it's a time where people are not calling, texting. So it's like, it's
Mhm.
great. It's me and my work. And I know for a few hours here, nobody's calling me. It's like 10 p.m. or 11, it's, and sometimes let me tell you, when people say I don't have time, I'm that type of person. Sometimes I feel like I don't have time to finish this and that, but the most wonderful last details or things or cool discoveries, I've done them in a quick session where I was gonna do laundry and I stopped by the studio because I have my studios at home. And I was like, you know what? I think I have an idea. And then I get in there and it's like, wow, this was an amazing session. I wasn't thinking it was going to be such a great idea. And it's because I think that's where the least expectations I had. I wasn't
Mm.
like thinking I was gonna open the whole studio and have a long studio session. It was more like, yeah, let me add a few details here and there. And then it's like, oh my God, wow, I was not putting any stress into this process. And this beautiful thing, this beautiful shape came out because I was not stressing about it, or just I was not. I was being completely. I don't know. It was fluid. I was in the flow state and in the true flow state. A question that I did have for Jade is like, I feel serene and calm when I'm in that state, right? But I tend to be a stressed person. After my studio hours and I go back to reality, how can you bring back that serenity and calm that you attain when
Mm.
you're in that meditative flow into your normal life? Like you're stuck in traffic. Miami has such a terrible, it's like
Yeah.
number one after LA or
Yeah.
two in traffic. And you lose your calm, you're not in a studio, you're not creating. Is there any tips that you can share with us to retrieve that feeling of serenity there, but in your daily mundane life, if
I
that's
love
you?
that question.
Yeah.
I think all of us experience this, right? And the number one thing is to find ways that you can, everyone's different, find ways that you can bring yourself back to calm, even outside of like very safe containers, because we live in kind of an unsafe world. And so breath breath deep breaths is literally the number one thing that, you hear people say this all the time, right? Like, take deep breaths whenever you're stressed, take deep breaths. But it's very, very true, right? When you can like really breathe, it can completely soften your nervous system. But I would say that many, many things. I would say
I know
that
it's hard to come back to a calm state, but
yeah, no, that's the thing. It's like we can't bring our art everywhere. Um,
exactly.
but what I find then is that there are different like self-regulation like techniques that I do. Breath, like I said, is one of them. But often what I'll do is I also live in a city. It's pretty loud here as well. And throughout the day, I will just make sure preemptively, before I'm even like triggered, before I'm activated, I bring myself, I take 5 minutes for myself here and there, 5 times a day, maybe even. And I just take some breaths. I allow myself to come back down into myself. And then when you can do that more and more, your nervous system capacity also stretches and it becomes stronger and stronger, so that you are really just able to move through your day with more of that baseline grounded. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, it really is about consistency, and it's about like finding practices that not necessarily like challenge you, but finding practices that you can embody even outside of like the safety of home.
I also had a therapist tell me once it was a real practical tool. And she said specifically when your amygdala, which is, your fear center in your brain, when it's activated, it can't function at the same time as the executive functioning, which is in your frontal lobe. And so she said, if you're feeling panic or you're feeling stress or anxiety, start to focus on, a detail in your car. If you're in the car, just look at the dashboard and start to describe it in your head. It's gray, it's bumpy, it's a little dusty, whatever. Or focus on a cup that's in front of you at your desk and notice the texture, touch it. And she said, just by doing those little things and listing them in your head, you're engaging your executive functioning and your amygdala can't be shouting at you at the same time. So I loved that technique.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Touching.
Those are great
It's really,
tips.
really good.
Yeah, touching
Touching.
something, I think that helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Touch.
Or I think
So
I've
Jade,
heard cold water. Like if you're in a flight or fight or flight, that you need like cold water in your face or your hands. I think that's what I've heard, because it shocks you out of that. Um, like you're in panic mode, and then that
Yeah.
calms you down. And I think
It can
that's what I've heard.
be very helpful, but what I will say is that it depends on the stress response that you're in, because the cold
Okay.
water can be very, very shocking if you're not
Mhm.
used to doing that, and you just all of a sudden you're like I've done this before, a bowl of cold water, and you like dunk it in.
It's like another stress.
It's like it can add to the stress if you are not careful. So
That's
um,
interesting.
yeah, so it's really about like what your personal nervous system and body needs to feel grounded, and it looks different for everyone.
Mhm.
What I will add is that if you tend to be someone who gets really like irritated or aggravated, if you're like someone who runs in the fight or flight, which is
Mhm.
let's say like a siren goes off and you immediately just like you want to like yell and you want to like react and lash out. What you need to do is bring your energy back down, like bring your breath back down into yourself, and like allow your exhales to be really long, and then also find ways that you can anchor. So like holding
Okay.
things. But if you are someone who tends to go into like a freeze state, so you find that when you're triggered or when you're activated or you feel imbalanced, you almost like numb out, or you dissociate, or you kind of want to run. Sometimes the best thing you can do is cold exposure could help because it activates you up.
Mhm.
Or you can just shake, just like engage your body a little bit if that is available for you.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be a full body shake, right? But just ways that you can like stretch or
Your
like,
hands or
yeah,
Mhm.
just like
Mhm.
activate that energy.
That's
Yeah.
great. It happens with me with sound. I'm very triggered by like if people are I'm in a coffee shop and people are having normal conversations. To me, they sound like they're right next to me. Like they're like that. Like I have 8 people surrounding me and talking to me, and it's no longer painful, but it's annoyance to sound. I think I have a little bit of misophonia because I feel like if people are having, I mean, obviously not loud, but like normal level, but there are many conversations at this. I just can't handle it. I have to go to the
Yep.
restroom and like just relax, or I'm already bothered and I don't want to be in that place. So I feel like I have
I'm
to
the
leave.
same way, Nicole.
I can't handle it. And I feel like I'm being
Mhm.
like rude
Yeah.
sometimes in a setting where there's like a dinner and I have to leave. I'm like, I just can't handle these stimuli. Like I have to go,
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it's part of the vestibular. I think it's like
Yeah.
overtaxed and I need a break.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people don't understand. Some people feel like you're being rude because you're not tolerant to other people having a conversation, but and you don't have an opportunity to explain to people. Sometimes you're in a setting like work event and you have to be there, and you're like, oh my god, so many conversations. So you have to excuse yourself and find that grounding. What Jade was saying, like finding those 5 minutes too. bring
Another
yourself
reason why
up.
art can be so therapeutic because it's often solo, and you don't
Right.
have, and
Yes.
unless you're at like some sort of kids play center or something, it's quiet and it's, subdued and it's solo, and so
Yes.
all those things are nurturing.
Exactly.
So, Jade,
Exactly.
how can someone find an art therapist? I mean, or is there, is that like, is it a common thing? Yeah. How does someone? I know at Vita, when we're recommending, we're definitely recommending to people if you're struggling, um, see a mental health therapist.
Mhm.
Talk therapy can be really useful for many things, and it doesn't mean that you're crazy. And we generally recommend, go to Psychology Today. They have a great um, a directory. Look for
Mhm.
there are people who are focused on chronic illnesses and or anxiety or pain. Those people are often, people with experience with somatic therapy. But
Mhm.
art therapy specifically, is that a specialty, and is there a way to find someone who can help you with that?
It definitely is a specialty. It definitely is still a little bit niche. So there isn't, you can find art therapists on Psychology Today if you type in art therapy or art therapist. Um, but I would say if you want to work with someone in person and you want to have that like in-person experience with an art therapist where you have options, where you have like, 10 million crayons and paints that you can, play with when you go into a studio. Um, and I would say best bet is to check with your local regional association of art therapists. Usually they're all of the professional art therapists in that region will be listed. So if you're in BC, you can check the BC one. If you're in, if there's a big one in America, it's the American Association of Art Therapists. You can check that out as well. But I would also say that online, I feel like a lot of therapists now are working, at least privately, are working um, online. So if you're open to working virtually, there are a lot of art therapists who are on social media. And you can find them and connect with them and see if you vibe with them as well. When we work with a therapist, we want to make sure obviously that we resonate with them and that they, that we feel like they can get us, they can get our experience. Maybe you want to find someone who is of the same nationality as you, or has gone through a similar journey as you. And so I do think that actually finding your therapist through social media, but of course making sure you vet you vet who you're working with, can be a nice way for you to be able to like connect with a therapist before you book in.
Mhm.
um,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. I totally second that. You definitely, and if the first person that you try you're not connecting with,
Yeah.
it's okay to, try someone else. It
Shop around.
definitely makes
Yes.
a
It's
difference.
Again,
important.
Well,
it's important. Yeah. You
Yeah.
vibe or not vibe. Like that's
Yeah.
immediate, right? Like you know somebody, you're like, okay, we don't click. Or
Yeah, I
you
mean,
click.
it's a vulnerable. You want to feel safe. It's like, again,
Exactly.
going back to vestibular
Yeah.
patients, we already don't feel safe. So
Yeah.
the safety is huge. And,
Yeah.
I think, as soon as you kind of connect with somebody, if you feel safe with them or not.
And then you don't
Yeah.
feel judged. Big word, right? Because a lot of
Yeah.
times you don't know, maybe you're triggered by certain ways of how they ask you how you're coping with your illness,
Yeah.
or why are you doing this or not doing. Like I feel like you have to feel like what you say, in a safe space, that you're not judged by your what you're doing, your patterns, your day to day, because you also make a mistake. We're human,
Yeah.
so even sometimes, I know I have to rest, and I'm not resting. I'm in the studio, so I know like sometimes I'm doing something I shouldn't be, and but it's good to talk about it with somebody who's not
Mhm.
judgmental. That's just gonna
Right.
understand and listen to you and try to shift to another direction, but not providing that blame, like, oh well, there you go, you're doing that. So yeah, it's important to vibe with
yeah.
them.
This was
especially
such
with
a
art.
fun
There's no right or
conversation.
wrong.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this was such a fun
Exactly.
conversation, you guys. It's like I want to go. I feel like I want to go pick up a scissors and just cut pieces of paper and make shapes or something. Maybe it's, I don't know. Back in when I was in kindergarten, we were making snowflakes this time of year, so maybe that's what it is.
Oh
Do
yeah.
it. You got to do it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's a rainy weekend here in the Pacific Northwest, and I think that's going to give me an excuse to do a little painting. So thanks for the
Oh, that's
inspiration, everyone.
I
Yeah,
love
thank you
that.
guys. This is
And thank
beautiful.
you
a
for
fun
sharing your
conversation.
experience, Nicole, and thank you for sharing your expertise, Jade. This has been
Of
wonderful.
course.
So wonderful.
Happy
Thank you
to.
so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to ICU this month.
We hope this conversation sparked new understanding of the vestibular journey. And for all of our patients out there, leaves you feeling just a little more heard and a little more seen. I see you.